Hi, welcome to the Story with Reddit channel. A new video will be released every day. Subscribe to the channel. Psychologists of Reddit, what made you realize you were treating a psychopath? When telling that he kept thinking about how killing people would be more fun than lame animals, stray cats and dogs and everything else he could catch. Only 11 years old. How do you treat someone in that scenario? And how likely is it to help them long term? I am only a psychology student, studying child, youth and clinical, and had the chance of my life to be in sessions with this young boy and his psychologist. It was really something else, and I was with her for some of the first sessions, so she was mostly trying to set the grounds on how he is as a person, what their options are to treating and the severity of his case. He is not living with his parents anymore because they can't control him or deal with it. But in treating for now, she will in short be trying to change his cognitive patterns and thoughts. But no, psychopathy is not something you can treat, but you can try keeping him in control of his negative schemas. This sounds like a life on medication or a life in a clinic. It must be devastating to the parents to see that this is your offspring. Unfortunately, you can't treat or stop psychopathy. His parents was not what I would call good, caring parents. Maybe that contributed a lot to this, maybe not, most likely it did though. My mom worked with a boy, 12 to 13 at the time, who had killed animals. He'd raped a sheep then cut its throat. He'd molested his younger brother. He was big for his age and wouldn't be allowed to be alone with female staff because he would always try to manipulate them and test his strength against them in subtle ways. He'd try to hug them but squeeze to see if they were strong enough to get out of it. They would often find drawings in his room of women tied up and mutilated. He wasn't allowed human-like toys anymore because he'd always destroy them, hang them, tie them up. The staff have all said it's only a matter of time before he actually kills a human, and at present there's nothing they can do about it because when he hits 16 he'll no longer be in their care. They had a certain degree of sympathy for him due to his upbringing. His mother was a junkie and would often sell him and his brother to pedophiles. They'd pick the boys up in a car, take them away, abuse them and then bring them back to her. This is the hardest about working with humans in the psychological field. The fact that people are this bad, and some much worse. Go on. Sorry, didn't see your comment. But yes, this is really disturbing. The abuse and stuff he did to those poor animals are something I can never hear about without being devastated. He talked about people, mostly the people from his school that were annoying like they were things, never talked about people or animals like they are living, breathing beings. This is a large red flag. He also said about the strays he killed and tortured. Well, I guess they don't have to die and all, but it is just to pass the time, you know. Clinical psychologist here. At first I didn't know. If anything, given the context, he was more put together than most of my patients. The subject of his criminal past came up. I only knew he had served prison time some years before, not what he was in for. I had met with him a month or two when this came up. Turns out it was 2 separate sentences served. Both were for rape. In both cases he was the exact thing we are afraid of, a guy lurking in a dark alley jumping a drunk girl. He told me about these things as if he was talking about the weather. When it dawned on me that he expressed no remorse or guilt whatsoever, I got the same cold, gut-wrenching kind of primal fear you feel when you're out for a walk and almost step on snake. How do you distinguish between lack of guilt and something being talked to death? I imagine, in and out of prison twice for rape, you weren't the first person to ask him about it. Were there other red flags? The way he expresses it, the words he uses, his body language, and most importantly, the context. Presumably, Bob talked a lot with the person in question. I presume it's not like talking about the weather, but more like being cold, uncaring, or talking about it like it's something normal, usual. Think about someone saying casually, "Oh yeah, I ate cereal this morning," but instead talking about rape or murder. Think about someone saying casually, "Oh yeah, I ate cereal this morning," but instead talking about rape or murder. I was thinking more along the lines of former junkies. They can become incredibly matter-of-fact about the shit they've done to get high. The PCLSV that, and when he was describing how he murdered 2 kids. He had no effect. Didn't name them. Justified his actions as not serious, etc. Took a few sessions to acknowledge the murder of the 2nd child. He was in denial, assuming I wouldn't like him if I knew he killed the other one too. Imagine the brain that thinks someone will be understanding about the murder of 1 child, but offended by the murder of 2. So bizarre. I sort of get it. I don't think it's so much that you think someone is okay with killing 1 kid but not 2. It's just you think you can explain away murdering 1 kid, but not sure you can convince them you killed 2 kids in a way that is understandable. Imagine it in a different context. Imagine you meet a man who is depressed and is kind of drunk at the bar. He mostly seems normal and you two strike up a conversation. He tells you he's depressed because his girlfriend broke up with him and while he was moving out he accidentally killed her cat. He didn't mean to, he was just carrying a big heavy box up some stairs, and he misjudged and thought he was at the top when really there was 1 more step left. So he tripped and when he fell he dropped the box on the cat and it died. But now everyone is really pissed off because they think he killed the cat on purpose. You might cut the guy a break thinking he just had some shitty luck and that accidents happen. But if the guy tells you that and then goes on to tell you the next week he was coming over to try and make amends with the ex and he accidentally ran over her other cat. Well, you might think that's too much of a coincidence and this guy is just trying to kill his ex's pet. Now this requires viewing killing a kid as something that isn't that big a deal but understanding that people get upset about it. Which is pretty much how this guy was described. Current psychologist working in a maximum security prison here. I've worked with 3 individuals I dare say would have met the criteria for antisocial personality disorder within the last 2 weeks. One commonality is that they use behaviors as tools to benefit only themselves. Self-harm not because they wish to hurt themselves but to use it as a tool to lure staff into the cell to incite violence, gain extra medication, be sent to the SHU which comes with a status boost. One person offered to get me a comfortable chair when we were in a session, not for my benefit but so that they could ensure I stuck around for longer to talk with them. A lot of positive impression management also. Sometimes you feel they care but there's unfortunately an ulterior motive. If he was lonely and wanted someone to talk to, is it really sinister that he would get you a chair so you would hang around longer? Just seems like something anyone might do. For sure, this is just a small example of manipulation and impression management. Impression management, I have never heard that term before, but it describes my ex, actually exes, perfectly. Do I put out a vibe that attracts these people? You might. I do. As verified by a guy with admitted ASPD. I asked him some questions about it, and he said he could sense that I had the sort of personality he could usually manipulate. I'd had a recent near miss so was on high alert, and when I described the other guy's behavior he agreed and explained the rationale behind it to me. Mostly flattery and subtle forced teaming. It was fascinating and I would have liked to keep talking to him to learn more. At the same time I felt really unsafe and as though he was still flattering me in the same way as the other guy, he was just doing it with the knowledge that I knew what I was dealing with. I think on some level he was experimenting to see if he could still reel me in. Often there is a particular face they make when they are relating a story, usually about how clever they are. One of the TED Talks on how to spot a liar calls it duping delight. Sometimes they can't contain their rage and you see them switch. Edit, last sentence is a personal observation. Sometimes they can't contain their rage and you see them switch. I've watched the TED Talk and it doesn't mention this. Could you elaborate on this sentence? Why rage when it is delightful? Anyway, it sounds pretty interesting. Duping delight is different from the rage thing. There is a specific term for these small, sudden, extremely brief flashes of rage. So brief that you often only notice it when you watch a few times or slow down a recording. I forget the name now, it's microflash or something. Anyway, duping delight sounds like one of those things that is almost too good to be true, as in too convenient. But man, the more you look into it, there are so many recorded instances where someone is 100% confirmed to be guilty, where the sudden flash of delight is hard to deny. I forget the name now, it's microflash or something. Micro-expression. At least that's what the TV show Lie to Me calls it. There was a study, and regular viewers of Lie to Me were significantly worse at picking out deception than people who'd never seen it. Link to the study? That's fucking hilarious, TBH. You feel it in your gut first. Using a validated measure, and constructing a thorough case history to discuss in supervision, this is how you test your gut feeling. But you feel it often quite quickly. It tends to begin with just a sense that something is off. When you're doing therapy with someone, we tend to build up quite a strong rapport with people. So there's lots of micromimicry going on, and you start to tune in quite deeply to unconscious body language. When you're in this state, sometimes you just start to feel very uneasy and you can't articulate verbally exactly why yet. This is often because of subtle micro-expressions, super fast flashes of emotion, lasting fractions of a second, that we perceive, but don't consciously register. You see flashes of contempt-related emotions and burglar smiles, basically emotions related to dominance and deception. The next thing you'll notice is a lot of use of projection going on. This starts quite quickly, usually in an assessment session. I mean, as an aside, being assessed by someone else can feel quite threatening to anyone's self-image, let alone a psychopath's. Quite predictably, there will be status challenges, asking you about your credentials, your experience, etc., and then often some put-downs and digs with plausible deniability, egg-joking that all psychologists are mad themselves, or just turning the tables by asking who's the maddest person you've ever treated. You start to feel on the back foot and like you're now being assessed by them. As time continues, they will attribute a lot of their own emotions to you as the projection deepens. Egg commenting that you look sad, asking if you're okay, or conversely asking why you got angry just then. As time passes, their effect turns from micro-expressions to more overt dominance displays, leaning back, smirking, getting up and striding around, etc. By this point, your initial gut feeling is getting more supportive evidence, and it's time to bust out the validated measures. The biggest sign of all is a general unwillingness to show any vulnerability at all, or to be in a one-down position. The engagement will be superficial, often pally, or matey, with lots of banter and joking, always flying close to the wind of outright mockery and contempt. They will start subtly and increasingly become overt in their need to control and dominate the therapy sessions. If the therapist maintains an aloof control, the ante may keep being raised and even end up with overt intimidation of the therapist. If you don't mind me asking, how do you deal with a patient when they get to that stage? Do you try to de-escalate in some way? If you don't mind me asking, how do you deal with a patient when they get to that stage? Do you try to de-escalate in some way? Fortunately, it doesn't happen very often. Most clients, even with histories of violence, etc., have bought into some minimal social contract that you are here to help them, if they've got to that point of taking a chair with you. If it gets to that point, it might mean the psychologist has missed some earlier warning signs or not dealt with them too well. If it does happen though, then normally you would call for help and/or also use de-escalation. When working with clients where violence is a risk, you'd always have either a panic button on your desk or on your badge lanyard, or at least someone nearby who can hear you call out. An apology and appeasing body language can go a long way too. In my experience, unintentionally intimidating behavior can be more common. One client used to get quite deep into rage towards someone from his past, but enacted towards me, standing over me, pointing and shouting, etc. I would have an agreement in place with the client that either of us can time out the session and we just stop and take a breather. That tends to help. Thank you, that's really interesting. Thank you for watching. Like and write a comment. Subscribe to the channel.